The refugee barge floated through endless silence, its engines long dead and its crew running on fear alone. The stars outside were cold and sharp like glass, and every breath inside the ship came with the sound of cracking ice. Rhea, a young mechanic from one of the inner colonies, moved between the trembling families, checking leaking oxygen lines and power cells. She had fixed this ship 100 times already, but it was like patching a ghost. Nothing lasted, and she could see the despair growing. In their faces, she told them it would be fine. She told them the distress beacon was working, but deep inside she knew that the beacon's range was small and the galaxy was vast. In the corner of the hold, a small alien boy named Kez clutched a piece of scrap metal shaped like a bird and stared at her with bright green eyes. He asked if anyone would come. Rhea smiled and said, "Someone always comes," but her voice was weak. The captain had stopped talking hours ago, and the nav officer was gone, lost in a failed repair outside when the hull cracked open like paper. The air recycler hummed, low lights flickered, and through a cracked viewport, Rhea saw the distant glimmer of another ship, maybe a pirate, maybe worse. Then the sensors whispered, "Life." Signs not from inside but outside, multiple readings closing fast. The refugees' panicked voices filled the corridor, some saying pirates, others saying scavengers. Then the emergency light shifted to red, and the captain limped in dragging a rifle. His face pale, he said, "Pirates." No one answered the beacon. "They're coming for what's left." Rhea looked out again and saw dark shapes sliding between the stars, fast, small, and hungry. The pirate ships came with no signal, just engines burning bright. They hailed the barge, offering mercy for surrender, promising to take only half the cargo, but everyone knew what that meant. Rhea stood near the airlock as the captain tried to stall them, his voice shaking through the comm. They fired once, just to prove. A point the barge shook, metal screamed. Lights went out and Rhea fell to the floor, holding Kez close. She thought this was how it ended, drifting between stars in silence. But then something strange happened. Every sensor went dead for a moment, and the pirates paused. Even they could feel it, a deep vibration in space, not sound but presence. Then a shadow passed over the stars behind them, huge and slow, like a mountain moving through water. The pirate scanners flickered, trying to define it. But they failed. All they saw was a blur of shifting light and cold metal. A warship of unknown class, no markings, no flags. Its armor absorbed starlight and gave nothing back. Then a voice came across every frequency, calm and steady. "This is the Terran. Vessel Valiant, stand down and withdraw immediately." The pirates laughed for a second, thinking it was a trick. Humans were said to be traders and settlers, not soldiers. But when the warship unfolded its wings of plasma sail and its main rail batteries lit up, the laughter stopped. One shot was all it took, not even aimed to kill, just a warning across the pirate formation. The nearest ship's hull melted like wax and turned to vapor. The rest scattered in panic, engines flaring in every direction. Rhea watched from the viewport, unable to breathe. The dark warship moved with grace. No thruster bloom, just a ripple of light bending around it. It drifted closer, and a halo of drones spread out, scanning the barge. Damage, then small craft launched, glowing. With soft blue trails, they were rescue boats. Rhea could see human figures in black armor moving with purpose, sealing hatches and pulling survivors into safety pods. One of them looked directly at her through the viewport. Their helmet mirrored stars, and a voice through comm said, "Hold on, we have you." She grabbed Kez and ran to the loading bay as the first of the rescue shuttles docked. The doors opened and cold air rushed in. Marines poured through their movements, silent but filled with control. They carried stretchers and medkits. One of them handed Rhea a thermal blanket and guided her aboard. She looked back once at the dying barge, its hull breaking apart and drifting away. Then she turned to the viewport inside the shuttle, where the massive warship loomed like a guardian of darkness. Captain Rourke watched from the command bridge of the Valiant, his expression unreadable. The refugees were safe, but he knew this attack was no random raid. The pirate formation was disciplined too, coordinated, too armed for scavengers. Someone was testing Terran resolve. He ordered the crew to scan the debris and retrieve any fragments of their command network. The data came back showing strange energy signatures and a coded pattern from an empire believed dead centuries ago. Rourke stood silently staring at the screen, knowing that something had just changed in the balance of the stars, as the last refugees boarded and the rescue pods detached. Rhea looked through the viewing bay. Pirate ships had fled, leaving behind nothing but drifting wrecks and silence. She asked one of the crew who they were. The soldier replied softly, "Starborn Command of Earth's Outer Fleet. We found you by your signal. You're safe now." She looked down at Kez, who whispered, "I told you someone would come," and Rhea nodded with tears in her eyes. In the command room, Rourke gave the order: set course for the Terran border. Maintain silent watch and keep the refugees under care. He knew the message would spread across the sectors that a human warship had appeared in deep space where no one expected them to ever return. It would frighten some and inspire others. And he also knew that the shadows behind the pirate fleet would not rest. Now they would come again, and when they did, the Valiant would be waiting. The stars outside shimmered as the great ship turned slowly, its engines igniting like dawn. Breaking through night, the galaxy had just remembered the name of humanity, and the silence of space would never sound the same again. The refugees were finally safe inside the great ship, and Rhea felt the strange hum beneath her feet, the rhythm of a living giant. Every corridor shone with silver light and human symbols carved into the walls like prayers. She followed the medic team with Kez, holding her hand still shaken from the terror they had escaped. The crew of the Valiant moved with quiet precision, men and women in dark uniforms, their faces calm, their eyes sharp, every motion felt trained and rehearsed like they had done this 1,000 times before. The air smelled clean. The floors glowed with soft energy panels, and somewhere deep in the hull, engines whispered like a heartbeat. Steady and strong, Captain Rourke stood on the bridge, surrounded by floating holograms and crew reports. The attack replayed on the screens in slow waves. Every angle recorded, every signal traced. The pirates had used tactics too advanced for their usual chaos. He could see timing, coordination, and encrypted bursts between their ships. Something guided them, and he wanted to know who his second officer. A tall woman named Naira spoke softly. "The energy signature matches the old Threx consortium, the same raiders who disappeared 20 years. Ego." Rourke nodded, then gave his next command: recover debris fragments, cross-check with past encounters. Send to Intelligence Corps, also keep our position dark. The fewer eyes that know we are here, the better. Rhea was taken to the medical bay where human doctors worked beside machines that seemed almost alive. She watched a medic treat burns with liquid light and seal wounds in seconds. Kez sat beside her, whispering about how the stars had saved them and asking if they could see Earth one day. A nurse smiled gently and said, "Maybe one day if the galaxy stays quiet." But Rhea noticed the tension beneath every calm smile. Everyone on this ship seemed to know that quiet was not meant to last. Later, Captain Rourke came to the bay, walking through rows of cots and wounded. His presence drew silence. He stopped beside Rhea and asked how many were left. She answered softly, 87, from almost 500. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "You did well keeping them alive. The beacon you repaired gave us the trace signal we followed." She looked up in surprise. "I didn't think it worked," he replied. "Sometimes hope travels farther than we measure." Then turned to his officer. "Prepare quarters for the refugees. They stay under protection until we reach the border hours." Later, alarms whispered across the hull, a faint ping in the outer sensors. Something moved in the dust ring near the wreckage. Rourke ordered full silence. All external lights off, stealth fields to maximum. The ship drifted like a ghost as they listened. The sensor officer frowned. New readings, multiple engines, small craft, moving without lights, forming an arc. Rourke's eyes narrowed. They came back. "These are not scavengers. This is a probe. Formation designed to test our response." He could almost feel the unseen eyes behind the pirates. A commander somewhere gauging human reaction. He ordered a tactical decoy, a plan his crew knew well. A set of small drones slipped from hidden bays, each emitting faint thermal echoes like an engine drift. The enemy closed in, eager to strike. The Valiant remained still. The decoys spread wide, then folded their trails into one single false signal, pretending to be a vulnerable freighter. The pirates lunged the trap, snapped. The drones detonated in lightless bursts, disabling engines without sound. When Rourke finally gave the order to reveal power, the Valiant rose from darkness, its guns silent, its presence alone, enough to send panic the enemy. Ships scattered into the void. From the observation deck, Rhea and Kez watched the lights fade. She asked, "Will they come again?" And a nearby officer said softly, "Always, but not unchallenged." Rourke listened to that answer as he studied the debris. A single shard drifted close and was pulled inside for analysis. Its edges glowed faintly, carved with a sigil, an ancient mark half erased by time. It was the same crest that intelligence once linked to the Threx fleet and to something older. A forgotten empire thought extinct. Rourke's mind went still for a moment. He had served long enough to know when an omen whispered through history. This was no random act. This was the start of something larger. Gathered his officers in the strategy chamber and projected the map of surrounding systems, lines of trade routes. Colonies and dead zones crossed the display. The coordinates encoded in the shard pointed to a distant sector called Careth Prime, a system long abandoned after a war that turned its moons into dust fields. The pirates could not have come from there unless someone reopened those mines or built bases in secret. Rourke traced the route slowly and then said one quiet sentence: "We go there not to fight, but to see what stirs." Meanwhile, Rhea helped in the lower decks repairing power nodes alongside engineers. She had never worked with technology like this. The systems responded almost intuitively, like they knew her intent. She felt the hum of energy running through the hull and thought, maybe this was how safety felt for the first time in her life. She looked out of the viewport and saw stars turning as the great ship changed course, the Valiant moving without sound, through the dark toward the hidden place that might explain everything. Kez sat beside her, humming softly, and said, "They said humans were gone from the deep places of the galaxy, but they were wrong." She smiled and answered, "Maybe we were never gone. Maybe we were just waiting." And the ship drifted onward, its hull glowing faintly as if it too was listening to the silence beyond, knowing the next encounter would decide whether peace could live or whether the ghosts of forgotten empires were ready to wake again. The Valiant moved through the dark lanes of space like a silent storm. Every pulse of its engines, wrapped in layers of stealth and gravity weave. No one outside the bridge knew where they were going. Only the captain and a few officers had the coordinates from the fragment, and even those were half corrupted. The refugees slept in secured quarters, watched over by medics and drones, while the crew worked in tight shifts, their movements sharp and wordless. Rhea was given a uniform of gray cloth and a tool band. She helped in the lower decks, learning systems faster than she thought possible, and every time she fixed a circuit or sealed a breach, she felt the heartbeat of the ship around her as if it was alive, guiding her hands in the command chamber. Captain Rourke studied the holographic map of Careth Prime. Once it had been a busy hub of trade and refueling, before a massive war left it burned and silent. Now its moons showed new energy traces, faint but rhythmic. Someone was there, rebuilding something not meant to exist. Naira, the first officer, analyzed the readings and said they are using old Terran tech modified beyond recognition. Rourke stared at the data and whispered, "That means someone had access to our lost archives." The implication hung in the air like a warning. He ordered long-range drones ahead and silent mode across all decks. No transmissions, no signals, no lights visible outside. The drones returned hours later with images of broken stations, rebuilt into black towers, every beam covered with slave harness rings and power conduits drawing from the planet core. The Threx consortium was alive, or maybe something worse had taken its place under a new flag of iron and fire in the central tower. The scanners picked faint life signs, thousands, maybe more, the slaves working non-stop to rebuild weapon platforms around the orbital ring. Rourke clenched his hands and said, "They are turning this place into a foundry for war." His voice stayed calm, but everyone could feel the rising anger beneath it. In the crew quarters, Rhea overheard whispers about Careth Prime and the command silence that followed it. She asked one of the engineers what it meant, and he said, "It means we are standing before something the galaxy hoped to forget. The Starborn Oath forbids interference in local wars, but it also commands us to protect life wherever hope still breathes." Rhea thought about the children in the refugee bay and the chains they had worn. She looked at Kez, who was now stronger and drawing on a tablet showing stars and orbits. He said, "My people once mined in that system. Maybe the ones left behind are still there." His voice shook, but his eyes burned with quiet hope. When Rourke gathered the officers, he made his decision. The Valiant would not call for reinforcements. They could not risk warning whoever commanded those towers. Instead, they would enter the system under shadow and extract as many slaves as possible. The mission would be fast, clean, and unrecorded. Naira hesitated and said, "Sir, the Council will call this an act of war." Rourke replied, "If war has already begun, our silence only helps the enemy." He looked through the viewport at the stars and added, "Besides, I have fought too long to ignore screams in the dark." The approach began in absolute quiet. The Valiant slid behind a shattered moon, using its gravity as cover. The ship's outer hull shimmered to match the void. Rhea was assigned to the repair team inside shuttle 3. She sat strapped in beside Kez, who had volunteered to guide the strike teams through the old tunnels. They both felt the vibration when the ship released them, shuttles moving like arrows into darkness. The station loomed ahead, vast and cruel, covered with lights of surveillance and drone swarms moving like wasps. The human pilots breathed, slow timing every movement to the rotation of the planet when they hit the shadow zone. They went in. Inside the tower, the smell of rust and oil burned. The air Rhea followed soldiers through tight halls while Kez directed them toward the slave pens. Every door they opened revealed hollow faces and metal collars. The captives looked at their rescuers in disbelief, as if they had seen ghosts from legend. One old miner whispered, "Humans came for us." Rhea helped cut the locks. Her hands shaking when the alarms finally blared, she thought they were doomed. But then from above, the Valiant unleashed its presence, engines flaring white like sunrise. Cutting through the clouds, the enemy's drones swarmed, but the warship moved with purpose. Lasers from the towers missed their mark as electromagnetic pulses rolled through the stations, shutting down their systems without killing power. Rourke had ordered precision, not destruction. As the rescued groups loaded into shuttles, the enemy flagship rose from the far side of the planet. Sleek black hull marked with the same Threk sigil, its commander broadcast a message across open channels declaring humans were violating ancient treaties and that punishment would follow. Rourke answered only once, "This is Starborn Command. Humanity answers only to conscience. If you enslave, we stand against you." His words carried across systems. The enemy fired. First, the Valiant fired back once, and the enemy ship cracked in two, silent and final. When the operation ended, more than 2,000 prisoners were freed. The towers burned without spreading to the surface. Rourke ordered every surviving enemy drone deactivated and left drifting as warning markers. The Valiant turned away, leaving no signatures behind. But the galaxy had already felt the tremor. Rhea stood on the viewing deck, holding Kez's hand as they watched Karath Prime shrink into distance. She asked, "Do you think they will tell others?" He nodded. "They have to. The stars need to know. Someone will answer their call." Rourke returned to his seat on the bridge. He looked at the empty space ahead and said softly to himself, "They will call us. Heroes or monsters, but either way they will remember that humans came back to the dark and refused to look away." The Valiant accelerated its engines, humming like a storm building far beyond sight. The first blow in the hidden war had been struck, and the galaxy would never sleep easily again. The Valiant sailed through the deep corridors of space, silent and unseen, carrying the weight of what it had done and what it had begun. The rescue at Karath Prime had spread faster than any official message could. Whispers moved through trade routes and pirate dens alike. The humans were back, and they were not afraid. Rumors painted them as angels or devils, depending on who told the tale. Some said they could appear from the void and vanish before a fleet could blink. Others said they wielded ancient weapons of light that could cut through planets. Captain Rourke ignored all of it. He stood on the bridge, watching the stars blur across the main screen and thinking of what would come next, because somewhere beyond the edge of mapped space, someone was already planning a reply. In the black corridors of the Imperial Regency fleet, Admiral Keth stood over a burning map table, his claws tapping the glass. He had lost Karath Prime, not to rebellion, but to a single Terran ship. The shame burned through him like acid. He told his officers that the next time humanity showed its face, he would drag its captain before the Regent in chains. Keith ordered new scout fleets to search for the Valiant and spread a trap at a place called the Black Reef, a gravity field of collapsing moons where no ship could safely jump. Keth intended to bait them with captured refugees, knowing that mercy was a weakness humans could not hide on the Valiant Rourke had already heard fragments of the enemy's movement intelligence reports picked from intercepted signals. He stood beside Naira, who pointed to a transmission repeating across the sector, a plea for help from a slave convoy lost. Near the Black Reef, the message carried human code but also strange distortions as if forged by machines. Rourke knew it smelled like bait, but his eyes darkened when he said, "Those are still living people. If the message is even half true, we cannot ignore it." The crew knew what that meant: another rescue, another risk, another test of the Starborn Oath. Rhea was now a part of the engineering division working on drone control units and power coils. She had seen enough to know what danger looked like, yet when she overheard the plan to approach the Black Reef, she did not hesitate to volunteer. Sue told the officer that she understood the old Terran systems better than most of the crew, and that her hands could move faster than any drone code. The officer agreed reluctantly, and she found herself again strapped into a shuttle with Kez sitting beside her, his eyes fixed on the stars. He whispered that this place they were going had a history. His people used to tell stories about it, a graveyard where ships vanished and never returned. When the Valiant entered the outer edge of the reef, space twisted like glass waves. Gravity lines folded in impossible arcs. The ship's shields groaned under invisible pressure. The lights flickered, and the sound of static filled the air. Rourke ordered full stealth, all external power off the ship, drifted in the tide like a shadow. They found the convoy half destroyed, 3 transports anchored together around a dying moon. Life readings weak but real as the shuttles moved in to dock. Rourke's instincts screamed. Something was wrong, he ordered. Scanners to full sweep, and saw it a second later, hidden beneath the moon's crust. A lattice of energy signatures building in a perfect spiral. A trap. Before he could react, the reef erupted, mines igniting like stars, hundreds of them all around. Electromagnetic bursts tore through the void. The Valiant shuddered under the shockwave. The convoy broke apart. Rhea gripped the console and shouted that shield integrity was failing. Kez cried out that the energy fields were feeding on the gravity lines. They were trying to crush the ship. Rourke's voice came through the calm and unshaken: reroute power from weapons to drives. Spin us with the tide, we ride it, not fight it. The crew obeyed. The warship turned with impossible grace, letting the gravity pull it faster and faster until the sensors screamed from overload. Then Rhea saw what he was doing. He was using the force of the collapsing moons as a sling. The Valiant looped around the core like a comet. The enemy fleet that had waited above was caught off guard as the Terran warship came roaring out of the gravity storm, glowing like a sun. Rourke ordered fire, all batteries one clean sweep. The Valiant unleashed streams of white energy slicing through enemy lines, not in anger, but precision, every shot crippling engines without total destruction. It was a message as much as a victory. The remaining enemy ships broke formation. Some fled, some surrendered. The trap had become their graveyard. Rourke ordered immediate search for survivors, including enemies. The crew worked in silence, recovering what they could. Rhea and Kez joined the med teams, helping both rescued slaves and captured soldiers. The boy looked at the wounded enemies and asked softly, "Why do we help them?" Rhea answered, "Because if we stop helping, we become what they are." When the Valiant finally cleared the last debris, the stars ahead looked calm again. But everyone aboard knew it was a fragile calm. Rourke stood on the observation deck, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Naira stepped beside him and said, "The Council will not be pleased when they learn we engaged without sanction." Rourke answered quietly, "Then let them be displeased. History will judge not by who followed orders, but by who stood between cruelty and the helpless." In the quiet that followed the battle, Kez drew a map from memory, showing worlds his people had lost to the Threx networks. Rhea brought it to the captain and said, "Maybe we can reach them before the next trap." Rourke studied the small glowing stars on the display and nodded. "We will go wherever the silence hides chains, because that is what the Starborn fleet was built for." The Valiant turned toward the next sector, its engines humming low, the crew weary, but unbroken. Somewhere deep inside, Rhea felt something new. Not just fear or duty, but belief that humanity's return to the stars was not conquest, but redemption. And as the ship vanished into the night, the galaxy whispered again about the warship that moved like a ghost and carried hope on its wings. The stars burned cold and distant while the Valiant drifted through the aftermath of the Black Reef battle. Every hull plate of the ship carried new scars, and every crew member carried silent weight. Yet inside the warship, the air was filled with something stronger than fear. The survivors they had rescued from the traps spoke of hope in voices that trembled. The stories spread faster than light across traders and refugees who crossed the neutral belts. They said that the humans of Earth had not forgotten their oath, that they fought without cruelty and vanished before retaliation could form. Captain Rourke listened to these rumors, but his eyes stayed sharp on the bigger truth. The enemy would not let this victory stand. In the deep chambers of the Imperial Regency, Admiral Keth stood before the council chamber. The Grand Lords watched him with cold eyes, while he swore that he would break the human ghost ship once, and for all he spoke with venom and pride, calling the Terrans cowards hiding behind noble words. His plan was simple. He would turn the story war against them, spread fear and deception until even the rescued worlds began to doubt their saviors. He began by sending messages across neutral space, claiming the Valiant had destroyed colonies and left survivors adrift. He forged visual proofs and played edited recordings showing the aftermath of battles twisted into propaganda. Soon, entire networks buzzed with divided opinions. Some saw humanity as heroes, others as bringers of new war. On the Valiant, the crew received fragments of these broadcasts while moving through border zones. The tension grew. Rourke gathered his officers and said quietly, "The war of guns is nothing compared to the war of words. They fear what we represent. That is why they twist our image." Naira suggested broadcasting evidence of their rescues, but Rourke shook his head. "Not yet. We act through deeds, not words. If we keep saving lives, their lies will fall on their own weight." Still, the crew felt the eyes of the galaxy on them, judging unseen. The next call for help came from a small system named Telora. Once a peaceful trade hub, now silent for 3 days. Their beacons flickered weakly, then went dark. Scans showed Imperial vessels in orbit and ground cities burning. Rourke looked at the images and gave one order: prepare for silent insertion. "We go now." Rhea had been promoted to chief technician. On drone command, she worked night and day tuning the autonomous rescue units. Kez served as navigation assistant, mapping safe corridors through minefields. When they reached Telora, the sky above the planet glowed with fire trails and dust. The Valiant entered low orbit without a signal. Engines muted like breath. Down below, the enemy Admiral Keth had occupied the capital with his fleet. Anchored above a frozen ring world, he had gathered hostages from Telora's noble houses and planned a live broadcast across the galaxy. He wanted to show the execution of traitors and call out the humans to face him openly. He declared that the Valiant would either appear to surrender, or he would burn Telora's moons to ash. The entire galaxy tuned in, waiting for the response. What Keth did not know was that Rourke had already answered by action. Not words. Using the glare of the system's twin suns as cover, the Valiant released a web of mirror drones. They floated among the ice fragments, each one carrying field generators that bent light around them when the moment came, and Keth's cameras began the broadcast. The Valiant appeared from nowhere, rising through the reflection of the rings, its silhouette splitting the light like a blade. Rourke's voice filled every channel across the sector. "This is Starborn Command. Release the hostages and leave Telora space, or we will end this in seconds." Keith laughed, calling it bluff, until the Valiant fired one beam across the empty void, slicing through an asteroid and sending debris through his formation. The battle that followed was not chaos. It was a dance. The Valiant moved between mirrors and ice, while enemy ships chased phantom signals every time they locked on. Their own sensors betrayed them. Guided missiles turned away, lost in false trails. Rhea directed the drone fleet from the command pit, her fingers flying across panels as hundreds of autonomous craft shielded civilian transports. Kez called out gravity shifts with calm precision, helping pilots weave through collapsing rings. Rourke gave only short orders. Steady, measured, confident, his presence like a wall of iron around them. When the final maneuver came, the Valiant cut its engines and drifted. Silently, the enemy's scanners thought it destroyed. Then the great ship came alive again from the blind side of the starbelt, its guns firing in perfect sequence, disabling engines and cutting power cores one by one. Keth tried to retreat, but his bridge was already breached by precision boarding pods. Naira led the Marines herself, storming through smoke and sparks. They found Keth gone, having escaped on a personal transport, but his fleet was broken, his hostages freed, and his command shattered. As Talora's people poured out of bunkers and shelters to see the black hull of the Terran warship hovering above their city, a cheer rose across the world. Cameras captured the image and sent it to every corner of the galaxy, a single ship against an empire standing in silence over the freed world. Rourke did not stay for speeches. He ordered supplies, dropped food, medicine, and fuel, then turned away into the void when a communication came through from neutral stations calling them saviors. He answered only, "We are not saviors, we are reminders that the weak still have guardians." Rhea watched the planet shrink into a blue spark, her hands trembling with exhaustion, but her heart filled with something she could not name. Kez stood beside her, whispering that maybe stories could fight lies after all. Rourke sat on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars, and said softly to himself, "The Regent will not stop until one of us falls. The next battle will not be in shadow. It will be in full light." The Valiant moved on, engines dimmed but spirits bright. The galaxy whispered again of the human warship that fought for the forgotten and vanished before glory could find it. And far away, Admiral Keth swore he would strike, where it hurt most, not on the battlefield, but at the very roots of the Starborn Oath itself. The Valiant crossed the dark expanse beyond Talora, moving through the wounded stars that still remembered war. Its hull repaired, but its soul heavy. The crew worked in silence, their faces drawn but their hearts steady. They had become a legend, a myth. The ghost fleet of Earth that appeared wherever chains still clinked and vanished before empires could strike back. Captain Rourke knew the cost of legend. It drew enemies like gravity. Admiral Keith had vanished after the loss at Talora, and every scout report whispered that he was gathering a force larger than any the humans had faced before. In the hidden system of Narth, he was said to be building a weapon, one that could burn entire worlds without a shot, a gravity crucible powered by captive suns. Rourke listened to the reports without expression, and then gave his command. "We find him. We end this before it reaches our borders." And the engine bay, Rhea worked with black grease on her hands, repairing a new drive core. The Valiant had taken damage from long jumps and gravity storms, yet she felt alive inside this endless task. Her heart no longer trembled when alarms sounded. It beat in rhythm with the ship itself. Kez, now older and more confident, had been training with the nav team, his alien eyes able to read star distortions humans could barely detect when he saw the coordinates of Narth. He went still. He told Rhea that his people once lived near that region before the Threx fleets erased them. "It is cursed," he said softly, "a place where light bends and does not return." Rhea looked at him and replied, "Maybe it is time. Light goes back there." The journey to Narth took weeks, the Valiant traveling under silent protocols, no transmissions, no signals. Every system dimmed to ghost power. The crew trained, rested, prepared. They knew this could be the final mission. When they arrived, the system appeared dead. A black sun, flickering weakly, surrounded by asteroid rings, broken ships, and dust storms. The sensors picked up faint pulses, not natural, artificial patterns repeating like heartbeats. Rourke ordered a scan through deep field filters, and what appeared on the display made even the veterans whisper. 3 massive rings of metal, orbiting the black sun, energy feeding between them through channels of living plasma. It was the gravity crucible, Keth's new weapon, still incomplete, but dangerous enough to destroy a world with a single surge. Rourke gathered his officers and said, "This will be no siege. This is precision. We strike the core, take down the control nodes, and leave before the main fleet returns." Naira volunteered to lead the assault, but Rourke shook his head. "I will go." This time he looked at Rhea across the room. She was no longer just a mechanic, she was part of the ship's pulse, and he said, "You will keep the engines alive if we fail. You take the refugees, and you run." Rhea stood straight, her voice firm. "We will not fail." The Valiant entered the system under cover of asteroid drift, its stealth fields blending with debris like a shadow, and smoke drones launched ahead, mapping the currents and defenses. Then out of the dark came Keth's fleet. His ships gleamed with stolen Terran designs, hulls black with mirrored armor he had learned from every defeat he had built. His armada in human image. Keth's voice came across the comm like venom. "I learned from you, Captain. You taught me. Mercy is a blade that cuts both ways. Now I will use your own design to end your myth." Rourke answered calm and cold, "You learned nothing. Mercy is not weakness. It is choice, and today that choice ends your war." The battle began with silence broken. Only by the vibration of engines, the Valiant split its drone wings into flanking arcs, while the main cannons charged light flowed along its hull like rivers of dawn. The enemy fired first massive gravity waves bending space around them, but the Valiant moved with impossible precision, surfing the distortions. Kez fed real-time readings into navigation, and Rhea rerouted reactor output to shield harmonics. Sweat ran down her face as systems screamed under overload. Each second stretched like eternity. Then the ship turned within the storm and cut through the center of Keith's line lasers carved through armor. Gravity shells imploded, ships folded inward under their own pull. It was destruction, but precise, every shot chosen, not for revenge, but for survival. Keth's flagship loomed over the crucible, feeding energy into the rings. His plan was to collapse the system itself, trapping both fleets inside. He screamed into the comm, "You cannot win even in victory, you die here." Rourke did not reply. He simply gave the order to dive. The Valiant descended toward the core of the crucible engines, howling plates burning the entire ship, shaking as gravitational pressure tore at its hull inside the chamber. Rhea and the engineers fought to keep systems stable. Sparks filled the air. Panels burst. She slammed her hands on the control board, rerouting coolant through ruptured conduits, and shouted that the drives were overheating. Naira called from the bridge, telling her to hold for 30 seconds more. Those 30 seconds changed everything. The Valiant fired a pulse directly into the crucible's heart, reversing its field. The energy that had been gathering for destruction folded back into itself. Keth's ship was caught in the implosion. His final transmission was a scream of disbelief as his fleet was torn apart. Light swallowed the horizon. The shockwave spread across the system for a moment. Everything was silent. Then the sensors showed the crucible collapsing in on itself, the black sun flaring into white. The weapon was gone. The Valiant emerged from the storm, burning and battered but alive. Rourke stood at the cracked viewport, his uniform scorched. He whispered to the crew, "We did not fight for conquest, we fought so others would not live in chains." As the ship drifted through the fading light, Rhea and Kez stood together on the deck, watching the fire fade into calm. They had survived what should have been death. They had witnessed the end of a monster and the rebirth of a star. When they finally cleared the North System, Rourke sent a single coded message across the void to all listening stations. The message carried 10 words. Humanity stands no longer in silence. We are guardians. The Valiant turned toward home, its engines weak but unbroken, and behind it the dying system glowed like a promise that darkness could be undone by courage and will alone. The Valiant limped through the pale light of dawn, drifting out of the wreckage of the North System, its engines flickering with wounds and glory. The stars around them were quiet now. The gravity storms had faded. The black sun reborn into a pale golden sphere, like a scar turned into a sunrise. The crew moved slowly through the corridors, patching systems, sealing fractures, breathing the first real calm they had known in months. They had won, but no one called it victory. Not yet for Captain Rourke. It felt more like the end of a long road that had started with a single distress signal. Out in forgotten space, the galaxy was still trembling from what had happened at North. Fleets had seen the light rip across systems. Entire empires were now questioning the balance of power, and the whispers had begun again about the human warship that fought darkness and vanished. Rourke stood on the bridge, his reflection dim in the cracked glass around him. Were his officers, tired faces lit by the faint glow of dying consoles. Naira reported that the reactors were stable again, but the main weapon grid was gone. Half the navigation systems were dead and the jump drive could fail at any moment. Rourke nodded, then asked about the refugees from the last mission. Rhea replied, "They were alive. All of them." She had become the voice of the lower decks, calm, steady, her hands black with oil and her hair tied back. She had grown into someone the crew trusted, like she had always been. Part of the Valiant. Kez stood beside her, no longer the frightened child he had once been. His gaze sharper now, touched by quiet purpose. A signal came through, faint and broken, a call for talks from the Regency. The Regent herself wanted to meet aboard a neutral platform. Rourke knew it was dangerous. Yet he also knew the galaxy was bleeding and tired maybe. It was time to end it with words instead of weapons. He gave the order to set course for the meeting. The crew hesitated, but obeyed. The Valiant crawled toward the neutral zone, on fading power, guided more by will than machinery. The meeting platform floated in the shadow of a shattered moon, a relic station left from the ancient trade wars, its halls still scarred with burns when the Valiant docked. Half the lights inside flickered like old ghosts. Rourke stepped onto the bridge with a small escort, among them Rhea and Nira behind him, carrying data slates of all the freed systems they had helped the Regent waited in a vast chamber of glass and metal. Her form tall, her robes flowing like smoke. She spoke in a voice cold but tired enough. "To show the truth, we are not enemies," she said. "We are survivors. We can rebuild if you withdraw your fleets." Rourke looked at her and replied evenly, "We have no fleets, only one ship and one oath. The galaxy does not need new empires, it needs time to heal." The Regent smiled thinly and stepped closer. "You have already changed everything, Captain. Your stories have spread further than your guns. The free worlds now rally behind your name, and if I cannot control them, I will destroy them." Her hand moved and alarms flared. Hidden turrets unfolded from the walls and drones dropped from the ceiling. Nira shouted, "Trap." Rourke moved fast, drawing his sidearm. The first shots echoed through the chamber. Rhea ducked behind, a pillar dragging Kez with her, the room filled with smoke and flashing light. The Regent tried to flee through a hidden passage, but Rourke caught her words before she vanished. "You cannot kill what you have already inspired," he said, outside the station, exploded in small bursts of light as the Valiant's defense drones swarmed through enemy ships, cutting through them without hesitation. Inside, Rhea and Kez guided wounded crew toward the docks. The corridors shook with each explosion, until finally, Rourke's voice came through the intercom. "All teams aboard now. We are leaving." The Valiant's engines flared one last time, ripping free from the docking rings as the station collapsed into fire. The blast faded behind them, leaving only dust and silence. The enemy fleet scattered without orders. The Regent was gone. Her command-broken news of her fall spread through the sectors faster than light. Her empire began to unravel, one world after another, casting down its banners. Rourke stood at the command table looking at the fractured map of the galaxy. He said softly, "This is not victory, this is survival. Now we must give them something better than fear. We must teach them peace." For weeks, the Valiant moved from world to world, helping stabilize the freed colonies, restoring power networks, distributing supplies wherever the Starborn Oath was recited. New banners rose bearing the emblem of open hands and a rising sun, the symbol of guardianship, not conquest. People began calling them the Fleet of Dawn, though only one ship carried the name. Rhea often stood at the observation deck, watching the people below, rebuilding homes, planting trees, children pointing to the sky when the warship passed overhead. Kez worked with the navigation, teams teaching them new maps, new safe routes through the old battlefields. When the final mission ended and the ship turned home, Rourke gathered the crew on the main deck. The stars beyond shimmered like scattered gold. He looked at them all and said, "We fought not for Earth alone, but for the voice of every soul who cannot raise their own. We have shown the galaxy that mercy is not weakness, and that even in darkness there can be light." The crew stood in silence, then raised their hands in salute, a quiet gesture of pride, not triumph, as the Valiant drifted toward the edge of Terran space. Rhea walked to the viewing window. She saw Earth for the first time, a small blue world glowing like memory. She smiled and said to Kez, "We made it." He nodded and whispered, "But the stars will call again." She looked at him and said, "Then we will answer." Captain Rourke stood alone in the command chair, watching the home system rise on the sensors. He whispered one last message to the void, to every world that had heard their name. "The Starborn Oath endures. Guard the weak, seek no throne. Stand in the light and remember what we were." The message echoed through the network, spreading like quiet fire until it reached every border, every outpost, and every heart that still believed. The Valiant entered orbit, engines slowing the scars on its hull, catching sunlight turning silver as the ship came to rest. Rourke closed his eyes for a moment and breathed peace for the first time since the war began. In the endless distance, the stars watched and waited. knowing that somewhere someday another call for help would rise. And when it did, the ghost warship of humanity would wake again. The galaxy had grown quiet in the hours after the Valiant's final mission, its hull scarred and gleaming like ancient stone under a dying sun. The freed world slowly rebuilt cities and farms, while ships carried supplies and knowledge to every corner where humans had walked into darkness and offered hope. Captain Rourke stood alone on the command deck, watching the pale blue of Terran space, his hands resting lightly on the console, his mind remembering every flash of fire, every cry of the rescued, and the weight of the oath they carried across the stars. Rhea moved beside him. No words needed between them. She had become the pulse of the ship, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. And Kez watched the stars beyond the viewport, dreaming of worlds he had never seen, but now knew could be saved. The Regent's empire was in shambles. Messages trickled from systems that had once obeyed her fleets, entire governments collapsing under the weight of lies exposed and chains broken. The galaxy whispered again about humans and the Starborn fleet. Though there was only one ship, the stories grew taller than mountains. The Valiant itself had become myth, a shadow moving through the void, a protector unseen until the desperate cried out, and it answered always without claim or demand. Only Presence Rourke called the crew together in the main deck, the refugees, the engineers, the Marines, the medics, everyone who had survived the journey of battles and rescues. He looked at them all and said softly, "The Starborn oath does not end here. We go home not for glory, but for promise. We return to the people who call this world their own to prepare the galaxy for peace, not fear. Every hand on this ship has carried that oath, and every life we saved has made it stronger." The crew stood silent, feeling the weight and honor of their service. Outside the ship, the void stretched endless and black, and yet the stars shone warmer. Somehow the light seemed to acknowledge the vow made in silence across countless systems. The hum of the engines carried like a heartbeat through every corridor, through every crew member's chest. The refugees slept, knowing finally that no one would come for them to enslave or destroy. Without warning, the Valiant would always arrive if they cried into the void for help. Rhea and Kez lingered near the observation deck, watching Earth grow larger with each jump. They had seen horrors and miracles both. And yet the young boy whispered softly, "We did it. We really did it." She nodded and said yes. And yet the galaxy will still call for us someday. Another darkness will rise, and when it does, we will answer. And their eyes turned together toward the distant stars, the silent witnesses to all that had been and all that could still come. Captain Rourke remained on the bridge alone for a moment longer. The empty seats of his officers reflecting the glow of distant suns, he reached for the console and activated a single long-range beacon, a pulse that carried the words of the Starborn oath across the void. To every world listening, no empire, no fleet, no shadow could break the promise contained in that signal. It said, "Stand free, protect the weak, remember what has been done, and act with honor. Humanity has returned, and it will not be moved by fear." The Valiant turned slowly toward home, engines humming low, its silhouette glinting silver against the stars. And in the silence of space, every member aboard felt it, the calm of completion. The weight of duty fulfilled the quiet pride of guardianship. The galaxy would not forget the tales of rescue, courage, and mercy the Starborn oath endured, because those who lived to carry it would tell it again and again. And every whispered story strengthened the promise that humans were not conquerors, but guardians with teeth. The stars stretched forever. Ahead and behind the ship, the void seemed at peace for the first time in centuries, the light of distant suns touching the hull, and the shadows no longer seemed threatening. The Valiant moved through the galaxy carrying the weight of legends and the hope of billions, and though it was one ship, its presence spoke louder than entire fleets could ever dream. Rourke closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines fill the silence. And in that quiet, he felt the oath complete for now. Yet always, ready to rise when darkness called the end,